Hello and welcome to today's webinar where we're focusing on Ontario's best and worst condo markets. A bit about myself, my name is Randy McDonald. I'm the president of Heresy Condo Marketing. We're specialists in investor-focused condo email marketing solutions since 2006. We've done over 40 pre-construction condo projects in that time and published over 900 real estate articles online. So these are our latest webinars available. First you're watching now, which is on Ontario's best and worst condo markets. Second, on maximizing condo investment profitability. Third is accelerate your condo portfolio's growth with refinancing. So all three of these videos are best practices for condo investing, regardless of which projects or cities you're looking at investing in. So let's dive in and talk about Ontario's best and worst condo markets. So there are four key ingredients for buying right with investment property for minimizing your loss and maximizing your long-term return on investment. First is buying at the lowest purchase price. The second is buying in what's known as an emerging property market. The third is constant monthly revenue with your tenants. And last is maximum monthly income with your tenants as well. And we're going to get into all of these, especially the first two. So the first, lowest purchase price. Okay, so buy low, sell high. We've all heard this before. It's the first rule of stock market investing and also real estate investing. It's conventional wisdom in the stock market, but much lesser known wisdom in condo investing. And you'll see why this is as we go through this presentation. Second is buying in an emerging property market. So just to give you a very brief summary of this, there are four phases of all real estate markets, and this is what the phases are in order. The first is what's known as an early market. An early market becomes an emerging market, the second phase. This phase becomes the third phase, the established market, and this one becomes the fourth, which is the mature market. And you're going to understand more of this as we go along, especially with the case study that we use on the Toronto West condo market, waterfront condo market. But suffice to say that the emerging market is where you want to be. Okay. And so it's very important to understand which of the four phases a given property market is in today. It has a huge influence on your long-term profitability of buying any new pre-construction condo there today. Okay, so you need to understand what's happening with an area. You know, we all know the whole thing of location. This is where you understand, look at a given neighborhood and understand which of the four phases in a property is available that's pre-construction, and based on that you can make an informed decision. Okay, so savvy investors carefully look for and buy in emerging markets, which are the most profitable markets. So what do I mean by emerging property market? Okay, so emerging, it's a neighborhood or area that's moving from relative obscurity, which is the early market phase, to surging demand for local properties, which is the emerging market phase. Okay, that's really the simplest way of saying it. So emerging property markets are imbalanced, that's very key, imbalanced supply and demand markets with clear measurable proof that current property demand is considerably greater than current property supply for at least one type of property, for instance condos. Okay, so the idea is that there's not much available, but the demand is rising, and that's when you want to get in. Okay, so emerging property markets will gradually become established property markets, the third phase, in the coming years, becoming more balanced as property supply grows toward meeting property demand as new condo projects arise. Okay, so with established market, there's less profit than emerging markets. Okay. Then this morphs into the fourth phase. So as established property markets become more and more supplied through time with new projects, they become mature property markets in the coming years, once again becoming imbalanced as property supply grows beyond property demand. And so with mature market, there's less profit than established markets. So once you are going beyond emerging markets, the profitability is just less. Okay, so properly timing your condo investments by buying in emerging markets before they become established or especially mature markets is very important for maximizing your long-term return on investment. Okay, so to boil this all down into a simple statement, the best condo market approach in a nutshell is this: the earlier you buy, the less you pay, the more you get, and therefore the more you'll earn long-term. Okay, and so this whole nutshell to the condo market approach is going to be evident, especially when we start getting into the case study, and you'll understand why the early birds truly get the worm with condo investing. So there's more information on these four phases and how they all work, and understanding each in the Maximizing Condo Investment Profitability So I've just given you a summary there. But to illustrate these concepts, what I'm going to do now is do an analysis of Toronto West Waterfront Humber Bay Shores condo market. Okay, so this is kind of a well-known landmark in Toronto. This is the Humber Bay Bridge that goes across the Humber River right where at its mouth where Lake Ontario is. And so this is a satellite view of the Humber Bay community. Okay, so just to give you a bit of an overview of the area, where my cursor is right now is the Humber Bay itself. Okay, and the Humber River is right here, right where my cursor is, where the Humber Bay Bridge is, and the Humber River goes up for many, many miles north of here. And the waterfront condo market is all of these properties and condos and a few townhomes in here actually too, right along this stretch here. Okay, and to a lesser extent, some of the condos that are over in this area. Okay, just a few of the significant bits of land around here. This is the Humber Bay Park, so this is all protected conservation land. Okay, no development will be happening there. Right where my cursor is here, this is the closed down Christie Cookie Factory. This has been here, was there for many years, and it closed down in 2012. And it remains to be seen what will happen there, but we'll get into this later as we go in this presentation. An even larger piece of land right here is the currently in operation Ontario Food Terminal. It's where all the tractor trailer trucks come down the Gardiner Expressway, come in there and drop off their produce and various grocery goods. And so it's like a big giant market for grocery stores. Okay, and so that is a large spot in itself. This is actually the Humber treatment plant. It's actually a sewage treatment plant. Okay, so that's a general overview. Now, looking at this more in detail, this is the what the phases in the 38 years that the condos have existed in the Humber Bay area. These are the different phases that the area has gone through in this time, and where the buildings have been during this phase. So, if you had bought, for instance, a condo in where my cursor is right now, in this phase, if you had bought it in this particular building right here, you would have been buying in the early phase. Okay, if you had bought a project and located in any of these light green areas, you see there's just a few of them, then you would be buying in the best of all four phases, which is the emerging. If you bought in the yellow area, that would be the established phase, and then the more recent mature phase, which is these dark green areas here. Now, the last is these gray areas. These are future condo locations, possibly. These nothing has been done with the Christie Cookie Factory yet. It's just sitting there, unused and vacant, but not torn down. This area is basically a big field. So these are future condo locations in the area. As again, this area right here is all protected conservation land. Another thing too is that this actually here is an early market as well today. And this area is called Stonegate, but that's a separate presentation altogether. But let's do an overview of these areas. So the Humber Bay Shores pre-construction condo market 2016 is currently where the pre-construction condos are being built, and this area is now a mature condo market, and it is definitely the worst area of the four phases to be investing in. You'll understand why, especially towards the end of this presentation. So let's start from the beginning with Humber Bay Shores. That actually goes back all the way to 1978 and went to 1991, and that is when the early condo market phase was happening in this area. Okay, so it all started with this building called the Palace Pier. Okay, this is Humber Bay Shores' first condo. It's the building that's in the foreground there. You can see it's right near the Humber Bay Bridge, right beside the Humber River. Okay, and to put this in perspective, this is right by the Humber Bay Bridge. Where my cursor is right now is where the Humber, the Palace Pier building first was. Okay, so that is why it is the early market and why it is colored by that shading, because it represented the entire early market for this area. Okay, and the reason is because it was the only building in this area from 1978 to 1991. So a full 13 years went by with only one building being in this area, and that being that building in the Palace in the foreground. Okay, so This building, there are 433 units. It was built in 1978, and that was all it was built for those years. Okay, so the original first Palace Pier Tower, the North Tower, was completed in 1970. It was one of the first condos ever in Toronto, and at that time, the 46th floor condo was the tallest residential structure in Canada, and it was a very bold project. Boldness is common in the early market phase in real estate markets because the land is cheap. You know, developers can buy a lot of land and make a big splash. Prices are cheap, and it can be a real bonanza at the beginning sometimes. Okay, now I wanted you to understand the amenities of these buildings, because as we go along, you're going to see that as we go through the different phases from early to emerging to established to mature, that the amenities in each building get less and less. So this is actually the best of the best for this area in terms of the amenities. Some really good amenities with this building up into the present day. I mean, 7 guest suites. How many condos buildings do you see that have that many guest suites in them? Okay. Another thing is the private shuttle bus that it actually has as a very notable thing. So in other words, there is actually a shuttle bus that goes between Union Station and this thing that was for the building's residents only, and it's just basically a really nice taxi service for them that takes them around. And it's all paid for in their condo fees. So, you know, and a few other really nice amenities too. Tennis court, things like that. You know, things that are just not found commonly now, especially in new condo buildings. So just a little side note here. This is to really put in perspective how far the condo scene has come along. This is a picture taken in around 1989 when the Sky Dome, then known Sky Dome Stadium, now called the Rogers Centre, was launched. Okay, so this is Toronto in 1989, and just take a look at the area around it, how few condos there are. Okay, so Palace Pier would have already been there for many years, but look at how far here, for instance, you can see in the distance how many miles these condos are in the distance. Now I'm not sure which exact buildings those are. You'd have to kind of do some, you know, sleuthing, but as far as I can tell, those are the buildings at Yonge and Eglinton, okay, that have been there for many years, decades. And anyways, regardless of which buildings are, you can see there's very little condos in the area. This area now, just to the west of the Rogers Centre, is all condos in the Concord City Place master plan community. Okay, so anyways, this is what the view of Toronto looks like from the top of the Palace Pier building. Okay, so you've got this terrific view of downtown Toronto, across the water. Right in the middle here you see this got a great view of High Park, so it's comparable to how in New York City everyone wants to have you know, a view of Central Park. Well, this is kind of what you get here with the Central Park in New York City. High Park is our Central Park. So here's a view at dusk from the same spot. Here's a view westbound, and you know, just great sunsets you get on Lake Ontario, you know, even in the evening with the full moon there. And so that's what it looked like for the first 13 years. Now the second phase is when the emerging condo markets to come, and this followed directly from 1991 to 2002 with the second building that was built in there, and that was the second Palace Place building. Okay, so it's the building that you see on the left, and it was built in 1991. Okay, so in this phase for the next 11 years, there were only 3 different projects built. Okay, so there was only 839 units in all these years. Okay, so just think from 1978 to 2002, there were only, you know, however many years that is, there was only 4 projects. You know, that's 22 years actually, 4 projects in the entire area. Okay, so you can see that if you look at the big picture, these real estate can be very predictable. Okay, when you look at it this way. Okay, so these 3 projects: Palace Place, project called Newport Beach, and another called Players Club. Okay, and there's how many units were in each one when the project was built. So the second Palace Place Tower, which was the South Tower, was Humber Bay's second condo, completed in 1991, 13 years after the first Palace Pier. And this is when the emerging market phase for Humber Bay Shores South began in the early 1990s. And it's really because you get the best and the most land. You can actually have an unobstructed view across the lake, and you may even see the mist rising from Niagara Falls as well as the Niagara Escarpment. Okay, so primo views. Okay, now this is the second Palace Pier building's amenities, and you can see they're really good, but not quite as good as the first one. Okay, and you'll see that as we go along, how the amenities just get worse and worse. Okay, So let's talk numbers, okay? This is the comparing the 1998 and 2005 resale prices for the second Palace Pier building, okay? So there's a whole bunch of market data, and to just boil it down, what we're looking at in terms of an 18-year growth between 1998 and 2016 for the same exact units from resale, there's how much the projects were worth in 1998 for resale, as how much the same units in 2005 and 2016. So you can see there's how much money was made. So you can just imagine buying in a luxury building in 1998, getting a condo for a mere 182,400 at 800 square feet. Okay, so and then there's what the thing is worth today. Okay, nearly double. Now, interesting. If you look on the side here, this is the 18-year growth and the percentage of growth. You can see there's about actually a 30-point spread, 30% spread between these, and that is because, of course, there's variations on fluctuations in terms of market, in terms of the sale prices. But generally speaking, really, what it is, it's different units in the building. Not all units are created equal. Some have better views, some are better height, etc. Right? So it's really important, therefore, to be buying early, as all realtors will tell you, to buy early in a project, because again, you get the best price and the best selection. So what you need to understand is not only buying early in a building, but also buying early in an area in general. That's how you get your best profitability. So just to give you a more sense of how much more you get by buying early, what you see here is that this light green area is the second building, the Palace Place building, built in 1991. So it has all of that area, and these areas here are not even as much land, and there's a total of 6 different buildings in them. Okay, you can see that there are 6, actually 7 if you count this one here. So 7 buildings crammed into less land than this building here, and that's because they came later. The land was more expensive, and so that's what happened. So you get more when you buy early at a better price. So these are the buildings again in the emerging market phase: Palace Place, Newport Beach, Players Club. So just to put in perspective where these are, okay, these are all the early sort of buildings here. So C and D is the Newport Beach, okay, and then K is, and this lower one below where it's kind of townhouses, is really, so you can see, just imagine that these 3 buildings here, O, P, K and N, K and C and D were the only ones there, and you can see there was lots of land, there was lots of wide open space at this time. Also, you notice here, C and D, there's a big field that's been developed since, because there was all this vacant land here, and it's actually kind of like a little park. It's like a little dog park. Okay, so the residents of these buildings have that advantage, especially the people who are living in the townhouses. Okay, and so here we're talking about this light green area, okay, in the emerging phase. This is where these buildings are located. Okay, now just to give you a sense of how much you get early on, how much nicer, okay, compared to what you'll see later. This is the Players Club, and it's the lower building. The one in the back behind it is the higher building, but this is the sort of the premium Players Club building. Okay, so a very nice little low rise, only 2 stories. Okay, you've got a private little walkway at the side there. This is what one of the balconies looks like. Lots of nice foliage there, nice square footage. Okay, quite roomy. All right. This is what it looks like down the way at Newport Beach, another emerging market property in this area. Okay, so these are the townhomes of Newport Beach. Okay, and these are the buildings of Newport Beach right behind it. Okay, so what you have in effect here is like a giant backyard for these people. Okay, although it's not private land per se, they've got a nice giant backyard. So you've got this nice fountain at the front here, a nice path that you can walk through, blade through, bike through, whatever. Okay, and this is what it basically looks like from outside. Okay, so not only you got a nice townhouse right beside the water, but you got this nice park right beside you as well. So again, some of the benefits of buying early. Okay, it's not private, but it's still quite nice. So now we get into the third phase. Okay, so this is when the market starts to pick up, and this is when people are starting to notice this area and where the momentum starts to pick up. So 2003 to 2010 is when the established condo market phase happened in this area. Okay, so this is what the area looked like. So just keep this picture in mind as we go along to know, just there was very few buildings at the time. Like this is where Newport Beach here is. All this area around it was undeveloped. You know, they weren't sure what they were doing with it. So you know, this is what it looked like early on. Not a lot there. And so when you see an area where there's not a lot there, but room for development, that's when you want to be investing. Okay, not when there's a gazillion condos already there. Okay. Okay, so here in this established phase, you can see that things are picking up a lot of momentum. Okay, so in 7 years, there's a lot more buildings being developed and a lot more units in each one. Okay, so they're moving up in size. Okay, so in this phase, go up from 1432. You know, a bit of momentum. It's just picking up speed. Okay, it's like accelerating in a car. It's going faster. Okay, so these are the different projects that came in this area, the year that they were built, and also the number of units in each. Okay. And there's where they fit onto this map if you want to go back in this and look. But basically, this emerging market phase went all the way up to this point, which is G and H, okay? And these two buildings here, these are the Explorer buildings, okay? And so what we're talking about here is this yellow phase here, the established, you know, second best, basically, and market to invest in. So that's where all those buildings are. There is that yellow strip right there. That's what it looked like. Okay, so you can see there's a steady march. This is again the predictability of real estate markets. So you can see, especially in this area, because everyone wants to be at the waterfront, it was just a steady, predictable of march of, you know, condo, you know, just moving along, steady along, and while there was, you know, until there was no land left. Okay, so this is to give you a sense here of how much better it would have been to invest in early rather than later. Okay, so the Palace Place building here, this is the average price increase that we've seen from 2005 to 2016. Okay, so keeping in mind that this is a building still that's 1991. So now we're talking about a 17-year-old building. Okay, but still, because it was so amenity rich and was built on such a big piece of land and so forth, that it just appreciates better in value than these later projects that you see here. You know, in fact, if you compare these units to the Waterford building, for instance, there was almost double the appreciation over this time. Okay, so this is even just between, and these are all, you know, sort of like later emerging market to early established market buildings. Okay, so really, it's so important as to when you get in. The earlier, the better. But you again, you don't want to be too early because, for instance, if you had bought in the very first Palace Pier building back in '78, you know, there's definitely a reason for that not there being a 13-year gap between the first and the second building, and that's no doubt because the condo demand was just not there yet, right? So if you had bought the thing as an investment back then, you may have had a hell of a time getting a tenant. Okay, so that's one of the perils of buying in a first project where no one knows what the demand is for the property in the area until it's actually built, or if it gets built, and then what the market is like, right? So it took a full 13 years to, you know, bear that. So buying in the Palace Place was definitely the best building to buy in this area, bar none. Something I always remember the well-known Canadian real estate investor Don Campbell saying is, you know, don't be first, but be second or third in any investment opportunity with real estate. Okay, and that makes a lot of sense because really Palace Place was second. Okay, now to give you a sense of what you get with these later buildings. Now these are the buildings that are still in the early established phase. Okay, so Grenadier Landing, this is the building. Now you've got nice patios here still. You know, in this early, you know, in the early established phase, okay, which is, you know, not far off in the emerging. Okay, so you're still getting lots bang for buck, great biggest patios, right? Here's another patio in that same building. Okay, so really, really lots of room here. That's just half of it. There's the sort of western half of it. There's kind of more the middle. There's that. So, you know, how many condo people would just kill to have that, something like that in being in a condo? So now here is the Explorer building, which is, you know, a few years later in this phase, and you know, you can just see little by little you're getting less with each one. You know, the patio is just not as big. It's just simply not. Okay, and this is that same building, the Explorer building, And this is what the people at this building get at the back. Okay, so all these units at the back here look like that. Okay, so that's pretty lame. All right, that's all there is a back door. There's absolutely no patio at all. Okay, in fact, that just looks like basically a general exit for anyone exiting the building, but it's actually a private residence. So now we move into the fourth phase of Humber Bay Shores, and this is where we are at present day with this area. It's a mature condo market. It's been that way since 2010 roughly. Okay, so what we're looking at is these four. Again, this is the mature market, and this is the areas that you see here. Okay, something else to notice here is that as the area picks up momentum, you see these phases just getting bigger. Okay, so here is the smallest, the early. This is a little bit bigger, the merging. The yellow gets a little bit bigger, and then that gets the bigger. Okay, so it's really starts to pick up momentum as we go along. So these are all the buildings that are in this mature market phase, and these are all the latest high-rises that have come up here in the last 4 to 6 years. Okay, so for years, this Explorer building was the limit of the development there. Okay, it just basically stopped. I have lived in this area, in the Toronto West area, for about 10 years, and there's a restaurant right where my cursor is called Eden, and there's many times where I would go there and hang out in the patio, and there was just nothing west of here. Okay, nothing. There was an old restaurant. There was a few sleazy motels that were still there, and so all of this has cropped up in the last 4 years, and you can just see how busy it is now. There's tons of projects happening. Okay, and so really this is where there is like a full-on condo boom happening in this part. Okay, so these are all the buildings that are happening. They're bigger, there's more of them, and it's adding way more units to the overall market. Okay, no doubt most of them smaller. Okay, and these are the future condos that are going to be in this area, even beyond that. Okay, that haven't even been started selling yet. Okay, and so this is what the area is starting to look like. It's starting to, this steady march of condos going westbound there. That's what it looks like. And this is what it will ultimately look like when this building that you see in the foreground, Eau de Soleil, is finished. Okay, it's 2 buildings, 66 and 44 stories, 1,200 units total in this one building. It's going to be the tallest building in Canada outside a major city's downtown core. So it's almost kind of coming full circle with Palace Pier, in that Palace Pier way back when was the tallest building in Canada. Now this is the tallest building in Canada outside a major city's downtown core. Okay, so, and this is what it will look like. Okay, so a far cry, just think of how a far cry it is from that 2-story Players Club townhome project. Okay, and how much less desirable it would be to live in something like this, especially with the smaller units. Okay, so there is what today looks like in the area. Okay, so all the condos have just marched all over, and just notice how much bigger they get over just this, where the mature phase is over in this way. Okay, so this diagram really kind of puts it all in perspective. Okay, and to show you the different phases in the area and how it plays out. So here on the very far right, you can see this is the first Palace Place building, or second building rather, the one that's built in 1991. Okay, so you can see all kinds of land around here, really nice. Showed you it's got a tennis court, just the best spot in the area. Okay, so, and then as you move into the further into the emerging market, you have these ones over here. Okay, and then as you get into more of the established market, you have these ones here. Okay, and just notice that they're more crammed together and they're taller. Okay, and that's just the nature of the beast. When land is more expensive for the developers, they have to build more to be more profitable. Okay, so this is your established phase, and now look at this phase, this white, and this isn't even including Eau de Soleil down at the end. This is how, look at how much more crammed in that this is, how many more buildings there are, just how much less desirable. So just compare right here to right here. There's really no comparison. Okay, so now just to put in perspective again, the number of units that are added to the market during this phase. So if you had bought in the early market phase, in that very first Palace Pier building, there was only 433 units in 13 years. So that's not a lot, And the emerging phase, there was only 839. But you can see it just picks up momentum, and then picks up momentum big time in the mature market phase, like 3 to 4 times the earlier amount. And so when you add it all up, here's the number of units that are being added to each phase each year. Okay, so in the emerging phase there was only 70 new units per year, but you compare it to the mature market, there's 443 being added in that time. Okay, so way more competition, and therefore it drives the price down. Okay, and if you compare the total number of units available in the area, adding them up cumulatively, okay, just compare the emerging phase here, right? 1,272 units total, not too much. Okay, now today with emerging phase, that's how many units there are on the market total, almost 6 times the number. Okay, so speaks for itself. Now there are even more that are very likely around the corner, and I call it the Christie Cookie Factor Cutter Condos question. Okay, so back in a 2012 Toronto Star article announced the closure of the 625,000 square foot Christie Cookie Factory on Lake Shore's north side, right north of this area. Okay, so at that time the factory's owner proposed 27 new condos on the factory site, and as of 2016 that factory is still closed yet still standing. It hasn't been torn down. Nothing official has happened, but let's just say hypothetically that happened, that they did get approval for that, and let's assume all high rises at 400 units each. That would mean an additional 10,800 units in Humber Bay area, amounting to about 18,000 condos total east of Park Lawn Road, more than doubling the total number of condos in that area. Okay, so this is the area that we're talking about, this gray area right here. Okay, that's the Christie Cookie Factory site. So you can see, if they were to just fill every square inch of that with condos, you can imagine how much it would make that area, not only these ones, but the ones in front of them, and how undesirable that location is, because there is no view of the water. Everything is blocked up. And also here, this is a big patch for future development. It's basically vacant land at the moment. And so you can see why getting in late. Now here's one very interesting not unintended, but unforeseen development for some people if they bought in this area. So this is basically saying that if you buy in this area, we may not have room for your kids at the local schools, that you're going to have to go outside this area. Now how far, who knows, but the point is that the people that are moving into these new buildings are often finding, according to this notice, that we can't take your kids, but all the people that bought earlier, their kids are in the area at the local schools. Okay, so, and here's another little interesting thing. I was actually just walking through here recently with my dog, and I saw this in the tunnel right by where right near where the tunnel that is underneath the Gardner, where the streetcar goes through. Someone had posted this, someone who lived in the area, so tired of traffic. So this is someone saying, let's get our local member of parliament and let's get them on this. So each unit within the condominium pays approximately $3,000 a year in property tax, yet there's traffic congestion, constant power outages, and inadequate infrastructure. So you can imagine there's so many people now living in this area that there are actually a ton of power outages because the infrastructure can't even handle it. Can't handle the power. It can't handle it, from this sort of saying, the traffic, because there's a gazillion more people. Just imagine if that Christie Cookie Factory gets added in, how many more people that's going to add to the area and how much it's going to make the congestion. So it makes far more sense to build a GO station here, but will that happen? The developer probably won't want that at all, whoever owns that land, because they're not going to make nearly much money as versus selling it to a condo developer. Okay, so now this is even more of the mature market phase, because this is the Humber Bay North area, and this is in 2016 is also mature condo market. Okay, so where we're talking about here is where my cursor is right now. This is the green area. This is the Humber Bay North area. Now one thing you can notice right off the bat is that these properties, these condos, have an inferior location, many of them, to the ones on the waterfront. These ones are just further away from the waterfront, don't have the panoramic water views like the ones do closer to the shore, and so it makes for an even worse investment in buying these. Okay, so here's what it looks like. I'm talking about this area right here, so the buildings that are right along here and the buildings that are right here. Okay, and so I'm not going to give you all the details on each building, but I just want to focus to put this in perspective to show you what would happen if you bought in a mature market. This is a building that's called Key West that's located in this area. Okay, so this is a view from Queensway and Park Lawn, just north of this Humber Bay. So this is the Humber Bay North community, condo community, and you can see it's a whole bunch of condos all really crammed together. Now if you get a bit closer, that's what it looks like. Okay, so Key West is the one right in the middle here. This is about a year ago taken, before it was finished, so its view is currently blocked by these buildings. These buildings are also new. Okay, now this is a view north, and you can see this is just Key West peeking out right here. Okay, so its view is gone. All right, now Key West launched in 2012. It's got 420 units. There's priced at 300K. And here's the really interesting thing: only 75% have been sold in 4 years as of May 2016. Okay, so this building has been launched in 4 years ago, and it's still not sold out. A lot of people think, oh yeah, condo buildings in Toronto, they sell out in a couple weeks or a weekend or whatever. Not the case at all. Okay, they're still got lots of units, over 100 units left, brand new, and this building is ready for occupancy. Okay, so now if you had bought in Key West back in 2012 in spring, okay, this is what your view would have looked like. Okay, because these condos that have all cropped up on the south part of the community have all cropped up in the last 4 to 6 years. Okay, so actually 4 years. So this is what your view would have looked like if you had bought then. Okay, so if you weren't a savvy investor and you look, you would just say, hey, my building, I've got a great view, I've got a water view, the unit that I pick, it's facing this way, I'm going to have a great water view. Okay, and but that's what you're going to see now instead. Okay, because Eau de Soleil and these other ones nearby have cropped up in that time frame that the Key West is being built. They've also been built at the same time. Okay, so now if you had bought here in one of these condos right here, just one building over from Key West, you would have had that much better of investment, because your views south are not going to be restricted. This is all conservation land and so forth. So it's so important to pick the right building in an area, in a right area, and you could be just one building off and have quite a bit way less in quality investment than other buildings in the area. Okay, now just to sort of add fuel to the fire, this is directly beside Key West's site. Okay, so this is another condo that's coming up directly beside it. Okay, 321 units, and there is Key West to the left. There to the right is another 2 buildings called South Beach, and in the top left here there is a site right beside it that is where you see a crane. There is another project that's under construction. Okay, so the point is that as an investment, people are much more likely to invest in either of these 2 buildings, most likely this one, because buying the earliest is the best time to buy, because you don't have to have a mortgage for 3 to 5 years, and your unit just appreciates in value time. So if you go and buy it in Key West as an investment, you have to get a 10 in there from day one, and so this is just really kind of shows you how competitive it comes in a mature market and why you want to avoid them. Okay, so avoid buying too late is really the golden rule here. So the result, you get bad monthly cash flow plus commodity condo market, and they both make condos in mature hot markets less attractive investments, restricting their capital appreciation rate. So what I mean by bad monthly cash flow is that it's so competitive that it drives the rents down, and you're paying a lot up front, and so some condos actually have a negative cash flow situation without a sufficient high enough number of down payment put in. So how do you buy at the right time? Okay, well, these are the key things. Again, low price. So property prices in emerging markets are low relative to established and especially mature property markets. So a developer can afford to leave more money on the table for investors due to cheaper land costs. The property is so much more expensive in mature markets that they have to just build lots more of them. And so buying early, better in every way. Okay, so second, buying an emerging market, you get the best locations. If the land costs are cheap with lots of availability, developers can afford to be very choosy and pick the very best AAA locations for the project. For instance, Palace Pier. Put that in perspective, this first building here in the area, this is the absolute best location in the area. Okay, it's right on the corner of the Humber River, which you see right here, where my cursor is. Okay, So you have a river view for some of the units. Lake Ontario is right here, and again, you get a great view across of the High Park, the downtown Toronto, all the way across Niagara Falls, over to Niagara Falls, seeing the mist there on some days, and the Niagara Scarp. Okay. Another thing about emerging property market is just growing property demand. Okay. Now, so that you've got clear proof in areas now experiencing major growth in property demand for one or more types of property, and the proof is new condo buildings are steadily getting added and selling well. Both of those things, steadily getting added and selling well. You got to watch that. Okay. And so what you see here is momentum with new buildings arising and starts in emerging phase. And it's like buying an emerging phase is like a surfer catching a wave. Okay, so here you can see a surfer, they're just getting on the wave as it's picking up, and they just ride that momentum as they go. And that's what happens when you buy in an emerging market. Okay, so to put that in perspective, you buy here and there's your momentum. Okay, so it's just picking up. Now it's really quite picking up, 1,432 units. And now it's really picking up. Okay, so growing property demand, condos are often the first to see heightened demand because they're the most affordable property type. Another thing about emerging property markets is low property supply. Just as important as growing property demand, this factor is typically overlooked by the average investor. Okay, and sometimes can be easy to identify. What you want to do is look around an area for how much developable land there is near. Okay, so how developable is this land? So readily developable land, you know, if there's vacant land, if there's existing commercial properties, these are easily developable lands, okay, where a developer can, you know, more easily come in, add new properties and so on. Not really developable is this residential areas where there's already houses. We all know that Toronto is heavily built up, you know, practically every square inch is being used for something, and so not really readily developable, especially areas where you have lots of rent-controlled housing. Okay, I mentioned earlier the Stonegate neighborhood that's on the map nearby, just north of there, and there are a ton of these rent-controlled houses that are there and much less likely to be torn down because the tenants don't have to leave. They don't want to leave because their rent is controlled. Their rates are, you know, not necessarily market. They're just, you know, rent controlled. So you can see here that an area like this, it was pretty predictable back in the emerging to established phase. Okay, all you have to do is look along the waterfront here and say, you know what, there's a whole bunch of vacant land. It's very desirable land because it's right by the water. I'm going to buy in one of these buildings because there's going to be more of them coming along and picking up. Okay, so you get the best price and the best selection and best everything at this time. So some of these areas, as I said, it's easy to tell early on. Just look at the area and you can tell where it's going. You always want to know where a market's going, not where it's at. Properties price questions. So best emerging markets where property storage will remain long-term or permanently due to barriers to entry for new properties. Okay, so here's two examples. Okay, so for instance, where I'm looking here, where right beside Key West, if you bought in that condo, you can be sure that, you know, these lands right in front of you here, because it's all protected conservation area. There's a butterfly habitat here. This is all protected. There's going to be no condo development going on there. Okay, so you know that your view is not going to get decimated like it was with Key West. Okay, now this is another big factor that's influencing Ontario in general. This is legislation, provincial legislation called the Ontario Places to Grow Act. So what the Ontario government is doing is restricting how much development can be done. That what the government wants to do is encourage development up rather than across. They want high-rise buildings, not buildings that are spread across the land and taking up a bunch of infrastructure costs. So all these green areas that you see around here, all protected areas that the government is saying no to big, you know, townhouse and home developments, and so it's causing more scarcity of land and therefore causing more developers to have to build condos, and is partly responsible for the condo boom in Toronto. So getting back to these four key ingredients of buying right, okay, lowest purchase price, emerging property market, constant monthly revenue, maximum monthly income. I want to introduce you to a new student condo project that meets all four of these investment criteria. Okay, it's called the Capital Student Condos in downtown Kingston. Okay, it's by Innate Developments. They're a condo and townhome specialist with 20 years experience developing student housing in undersupplied areas outside the Greater Toronto Area, including Waterloo and downtown Kingston. Okay, so there's a picture of what the Capital will look like upon construction. And the reason I bring this to your attention is because the Capitol building, in terms of its market positioning, is where the second Palace Pier building was. So 1991's then new Palace Place to Toronto West Waterfront, when it was an emerging market. Today's Capitol Condos to downtown Kingston is an emerging market, as well as was 1991. Okay, so you can see Palace Pier has nice waterfront view. Okay, and as does the Capitol Capitol Condos in downtown Kingston. It's actually the first high-rise in downtown Kingston, although there are other condo buildings in the area. This is the first high-rise. Okay, so it's an early market leader in downtown Kingston. Great thing is that the lowest purchase price factor applies here. Capital's prices start at $239,999 for one-bedroom units, which is $50,000 to $150,000 less than Toronto. It's an emerging property market, and we know that because the current condo rental vacancy rate in downtown Kingston is currently very low, 0.3%, proving the area is very undersupplied relative to demand. Plus, Capital's prime AAA location near Queen's University with a 98 of 100 walk score today. Okay, so 0.3%. In the separate webinars we show how 0.3%, you don't find anything that low in the Toronto area, with one or two exceptions, and Toronto isn't one of them. It's higher, actually. Okay, so very little supply, high demand, high prices. Okay, so innate developments. So for constant monthly revenue, here's how the Capital works for this. Okay, so innate developments offers investors a turnkey, hands-off investment for Toronto area investors with a guaranteed tenant for their condo at a guaranteed monthly rate for the first year, plus all property management and unit furnishings selected, delivered, and installed. Okay, so we know that if people are looking at this and they're in Toronto, they don't want to be landlords to a place that's 2 hours away. So the developer has you covered. Okay, they've got a turnkey where they're providing tenant management, property management, and furnishing the units for many of the areas, potential tenants, which are students. Okay, in nearby Queen's University. Okay, so now maximum monthly income because of this. So because of this low price at $239,999 and high rental demand and high rents, a 0.3 vacancy rate in downtown Kingston, the Capital has a much better positive monthly cash flow situation from rent than typical Toronto GTA condos. If you actually look at the condo, at the cash flow monthly income situation with many pre-construction condos, you can actually be losing money or just simply breaking even in many cases, especially if you don't buy right. You don't want that. Do you want to be losing money every month? No, you want an investment that has positive monthly cash flow and will continue to have more of it over time, and the Capital definitely has that, as we show in our other presentations. So in those presentations, we've offered here some investor due diligence resources specifically for this building, so you can do your homework and then make an informed decision on this project. Okay, so you can get the details on innate development's stellar track record in developing student condos in an emerging market in the video Ontario's Undersupplied Condo Markets Part 1, which is all on Waterloo, and this developer's great stellar track record in making money for investors in Waterloo with student housing back starting in 2012. The other video, Get Kingston market details, in the video where we're also talking about another undersupplied condo market, and that's downtown Kingston. So there's a separate video on that. And also we've got a detailed return on investment video on the Capital in the video financial analysis for the Capital condos. So in that we talk about the monthly income situation, we talk about how much mortgage is being paid down by over the years, and also the capital appreciation based on resale values in the area, the Kingston area in general. Okay, so for access to these and more investor education videos, register for the Capital condos on the next page you'll be directed to right after this presentation ends in a few moments. If you'd like any more information about anything in this presentation, feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Randy McDonald. There's my contact info. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.